Hello and welcome again to Build Back Liberal. This time I'm joined by Elaine Bagshaw, who is a member of the federal board and was Layla Moran's campaign manager in the recent leadership election. Hello Elaine.
Hi, Ryan.
So firstly, for those who aren't familiar with your career and your involvement in the party, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Like what's your background?
So I first joined the party when I was at uni, so that would be kind of 14 years ago now, I think. And it was like many people that will be watching, like signed up intending to maybe deliver a few leaflets, and that would be the end of it, which you can never get away with in the Lib Dems. So I ended up as chair of what is now the Young Liberals, but was then Liberal Youth. 2008 to 2010. So in the run up into the coalition, I was on federal exec during the coalition, which was the precursor to federal board. And then post 2015, I rebuilt the local party here in Tower Hamlets. And then I've done various other things as well in my years in the party. So at the moment, I'm a vice chair of federal board, and I'm an honorary VP for Young Liberals as well.
So very recently you were managing Layla's campaign. How did you come to be her campaign manager?
Very randomly. So I think it was really due to Neil Fawcett, who obviously runs her campaigns in Oxford, Preston, Abingdon. I'd worked with him on Joe's leadership election. And so I think when they were starting to pull the team together for Layla's bid, it was Neil that mentioned my name. And so, yeah, then it was a very random WhatsApp message one night in January. And then back when you could meet in person in Parliament, a conversation in Layla's office. And yeah, that was it really. So yeah, I think it was really from the work that I'd done on Joe's campaign that I ended up running Layla's, which was great.
Most people aren't familiar about sort of how you go about putting together a leadership campaign and what is actually involved in that. So, how would you sort of outline, if you could outline what sort of were the early stages and steps, like how did it sort of play out?
I mean, to start with, it was things like putting together who the core team was going to be. So you have to have a legal agent who was Anthony Hook for us, working out kind of what Neil's role was going to be and mine. And then we had various teams and we appointed leads for those, which is the same as you do on kind of any other leadership campaign. Obviously, the slight difference we had on this one was about 6 weeks into all of that, a little thing called COVID-19 became far more serious. So that had a really big impact. And actually, even I'm just remembering this. The dates for the leadership election all got moved. And at one point, we weren't actually going to be doing it until next year, I think it was. We delayed the whole thing for quite a long time. So then it was, kind of foot off the accelerator and thought we'd have more time to build and working out how that would work, having to set up a leadership campaign so that it could run virtually, thinking that we had a year to do that. And then obviously the date got changed again. So then it was ramping everything back up, but also in the new world of the first leadership campaign ever that was going to be done completely online, no physical events or anything like that. So things looked quite different to ones that myself and other people on the team had been on before. You didn't need a diary manager as much anymore because you didn't have to coordinate trains, which was great because that is quite a logistical challenge, getting MPs across the country. So yeah, it was really all of us in the core team trying to find like who were those people that we knew or that we'd heard of that we thought could into the team, starting to raise money, working out like what the message was going to be. 2019 had been so bruising, and then obviously the election review report came out before the leadership election started. So really working out what that was going to be, and what Layla's selling points would be as well. So yeah, not that different to a parliamentary campaign, but obviously quite a different audience. So yeah.
So thinking about the message, what do you feel was the Layla trying to get across with that campaign, and how well do you think you were able to communicate those ideas?
So I think, well, one of the main things was that the party needed to change, and that was built off of what was in the Thornhill review, but also the poll rating at that point being at 6%. It obviously kind of waves between 5 and 10, if I'm being generous about some of the polls I've seen. So it's not shifted that much since. And it was really about, we're not engaging with the people that we need to be engaging with. We've lost not just like votes, but that we had just generally lost people's interest, and no one was listening to us anymore, and we had to do something to really shift that to get us back to where we wanted to be, changes that we needed to make within the party structure as well. And I think as well it was really about that COVID was an opportunity to shift the dialogue in politics completely. So, I think Layla was the first one to come out in support of universal basic income, which now is now party policy, but had been quite a hot potato for quite a long time. And that was in the vein of that we needed a more compassionate politics, we needed a more equal society. And obviously, as awful as COVID has been, there is an opportunity there to fundamentally change society as well, and to do things just radically differently. In terms of how well we got it across, I think we got things across really well, actually, and particularly that message about the party needed to change. I just think the situation we were in was that what happened in December, the blame for that was laid very much at Ed's previous opponent's door. And so there wasn't really, in hindsight, much that we could do to shift people's views. People that did phone canvassing for us, I think, will know there was a lot of, lots of members kind of felt, right, well, we should have voted for Ed last time because of what happened in December, so we're going to vote for him this time. And no matter what you say, that's quite difficult to shift. I think basically the leadership election was probably settled really on December the 20th or whenever the general election was last time. I think, no, it was the 13th, wasn't it? So yeah, December the 14th. But that was it. I think everyone really knew who was going to end up as leader after that.
I think there's a few different points there. I mean, I think one thing that really stood out was how Layla did have ideas, obviously Build Back Better, which has led on to this series, and that's desire for change of the party. And I think it was very obvious that Ed was replicating Layla's rhetoric and ideas as time went on, rather than the other way around. So Layla was so much setting the agenda, but was not winning the campaign. And I think we'll come on now to think to the challenges that you faced in this. Why Layla didn't win. You said about how perceptions of the last election were really shaping this one. You talk a bit more about that, though. What was it about that result that people felt that meant we needed to move towards Ed as our leader rather than Layla?
So I think it was really just it's a natural human reaction. I think that it had been Ed versus Joe the previous time. What happened in December was seen as a failure of Joe, which I don't believe. Like, as much as mistakes were made, I don't think it ever comes down to one person in these situations. But partly her being leader, but partly a lot of it as well, her being a woman. The blame was laid squarely at her feet. And so I think a lot of people just said, well, if Ed had been leader instead, none of this would have happened, which I also really don't think is true. And to Ed's credit, I also don't think he thinks that's true either. I think the result was partly a surprise, because there were a number of places where obviously we were close. I I think it was also, we as a party, well, I don't think any party has been through the emotional shock of losing your leader in a general election. Like, that was awful. And within only a few months of Joe having been elected as well, like, that was a real kicking for everyone. The fact that we came back with so few seats, and I think it's not just that we came back with so few seats, it was that we came back with so few seats again for the third general election in a row. And after we'd had the defectors, the really good set of European elections. And one of the things that, the Thornhill review makes clear is actually you could potentially have seen this coming. But I think we had been in the doldrums for so long that when there were the green shoots, we just looked at those and just completely forgot about everything else and all of the other risks that were there. The fact that, we still deal with first past the post, that Jeremy Corbyn was still leader of the Labour Party, and lots of people would have heard what I did of, I would vote for you, but I'm terrified of Jeremy, or I would vote for you, but I really love Jeremy. It was he was, very divisive. And I think that perfect storm of just how hard people had fought, and then to get kicked so hard was really difficult. You look at some of the seats that defectors were fighting that had, some of them had never even had a councillor before, and then all of a sudden they were target seats. But people really threw themselves into it and gave it everything they had. So to end up in some of those seats, some of them we were a very good second, but some of them we were still third. That's really, really hard. I think a lot of people just kind of said, oh, okay, actually we made the wrong choice last time.
I think the psychological impact of the result is almost more dramatic than the result itself in a way, because if you look at the at the seat level and the number of places where we were incredibly close, there is a only very slightly different world where right now Joe Swinson is leader of the Liberal Democrats, a party of about 20 MPs, and life has gone on, and none of us last year has it happened. It was, and I think the members of, I think you're right, they've interpreted this as a colossal failure, when you could argue that actually the failure was purely tactical. Few too many seats targeted, not enough effort in the right places, slightly unrealistic projections about certain things, and the difference between this result being the disaster it was and merely a mild disappointment is actually very, very marginal.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the, I think sometimes we forget that, like, our members see the rhetoric that's coming out on TV and stuff like that. So I remember, like, one of my favorite things about Charles Kennedy's campaigns was, I still remember this, he had a huge billboard, and it was if everyone who wanted to vote Lib Dem voted Lib Dem, this is how many seats we'd have. And it was like 3/4 of them, and it was amazing. On this one, we kind of went out saying, oh, Joe's going to be Prime Minister, we believe we can win over 200 seats. Now, for a while, that was also the dialogue internally. But what happened was, obviously, members across the country and members who had joined off the back of being anti-Brexit and had not been a member of a political party before, so don't necessarily realise that, there might be some difference between tactics and what you might be saying, all believed that was where we were. And hindsight is always 2020. We all now know that was never the position that we were in, and that is, and I think we also forget it was a really short election. So we went in what was it, 6 weeks from 250 seats, like closest to running the country we've ever been on our own, to we came back with so few people. That is traumatic. Like, if you're a candidate that was really close, or even just if you've given the party money, signing up to be a member of a political party is quite a big deal now. Like, it's quite a commitment. So to go through that, I think is, it was so hard for people. And I think the natural reaction was, right, okay, there's that thing of, right, find someone whose shoulders we can put this on. And when the leaders lost their seat, it's a lot easier to do that, because they're not in the public eye anymore or anything like that. So I think that was part of it. And then it's very natural to go, okay, well, if we hadn't voted for that person and voted for the other one, it probably wouldn't have happened. So if we get the opportunity to do that again, we'll do that. And that's fair enough. Like, people are people. They don't work on rational logic as much as we might like to think sometimes.
So coming back to the leadership election, we've talked a bit about the challenges here in that members, as you say, right from the general election onwards, were thinking, we didn't vote Ed last time and look what happened. We did vote Ed this time. So there's that sort of one. But more sort of tangibly, what kind of advantages and disadvantages were there between the candidates in terms of, what were the things that gave Ed not just winning, but actually winning by the large margin that he did in the end?
A few. So I think, obviously, he had run within the last year. So he had done in his campaign against Joe 2 or 3 mailings to members. So people already knew who he was. He'd obviously been a MP for 20 years. So he had far greater name recognition than Layla did. So that was one thing. There was obviously the inbuilt advantage of being acting leader, which I think it was a mistake that the party decided they would kind of accept that and let that carry on happening. But, they did what they did. So that meant that there was, extra staff and extra media coverage and things like that. Now, I mean, on our campaign, like, we blew everyone out of the water in terms of media coverage. So that ended up not being as much of an advantage as I think people might have thought it was. But it was still a problem. What else was there? There was, the email list that had been put together in the last leadership election. There's all of the, you can go straight back to your donors that had donated before. So there's all of that kind of infrastructure that's there. That was an advantage. I do think there was a general advantage, and some people will be uncomfortable with this, but he is a middle-class white man, and that is a huge advantage. And I think that, coupled with he was already acting leader, that is a double whammy against a woman who is, well, a woman in general, but a woman who is from a Palestinian background and is pansexual. Like, it just compounds all of the structural disadvantages that Layla had. So yeah, there's the things that are obvious of, he could just kind of go and call all of the people that he'd used when he was running against Joe. But then there are all those other things that, all of us come up against in society in general, that unfortunately played out during the leadership campaign as well.
That's absolutely right. And I've also would add that Ed managed a significant fundraising advantage as well, which is enormously significant. He has long-standing relationships with a donor base in the party. Every one of the party's biggest donors will have met Ed 1 million times, and that's the difference as well. I mean, I think the thing that sort of the statistic here that I would use to really show is Ed was planning to run for leader in 2015. He'd registered a campaign website, he had been approaching people to be part of his campaign team, then he lost his seat at the 2015 election. So Ed has been running longer than Layla's political career.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep.
Ed's leadership campaign was only mildly interrupted by general elections. Otherwise, he was running for Gen Leader consistently for 5 years. And when you're the more the outsider, you want more time to to get ahead, to build your reputation, to build a profile. And because of when the leadership election was moving around, all sorts of reasons, Layla didn't really get the run up that is needed to overcome those kind of different disadvantages. And I think the lesson that every campaign that ever fails, the most common reason is starting early and having time and building momentum earlier. That's why most people lose council elections, because they don't start campaigning until a couple of months before. That's why most people lose parliamentary elections, and it happens in leadership elections as well. How much more Layla could have done is really debatable in this instance, but the fundamentals of that really underpin that. So you have been a member of federal board and federal exec for quite a few years. You've always been very outspoken about how the party conducts itself, the way it thinks and the way it behaves. Looking ahead now, with so much hindsight that we have available to us, what do you think the party needs to be looking at to change to be effective in future?
I mean, outspoken is a far more politer term than some people would use, but in terms of what we need to change, I mean, there's a lot. It's kind of a where do you start thing, really. I mean, we are changing a lot of things already. So I'd like Mark's doing a brilliant job as president, and Mike's doing a great job as chief exec as well. I guess one of the main things actually is when I think about who's on board, and I have to include myself in this because I've been there for a long time, it's often the same people that are in positions of power in the party. Like, it is great that once you're in, you're in. Like, I'm the only person in my family that's been to university. Like, this is probably one of the few parties where actually I'd have been able to do all of the amazing things that I've done. But it's definitely a kind of, once you're in the in crowd, it's very easy to just bounce around committee positions. It's very difficult to actually get that first in. And to be honest, like, when I ended up chair of the youth and student wing, I did not realise what I was getting myself into. So this has kind of been a very happy accident. But it's very difficult for other people to really come through. So we need to be a lot better at partly talent spotting and developing people and bringing them in. And that's definitely a thing that I'm conscious of I need to do as a vice chair of the board, and not just kind of sit there and run again myself and make sure everyone else reruns next time. We need to have new people coming in. But it's also the kind of having really honest and frank conversations with people that have, past roles between themselves for ages, where they've been on boards and committees and things like that for a very, very long time, and just like, if people are still adding value, that's brilliant. But a lot of the time it's very much the same core group of people that are running everything, and it's very difficult to change things around that. So I think we need to be a lot better at kind of saying, maybe it's time for someone new to come in to this, and making sure that those people are genuinely diverse as well, and diverse in like thinking and background, and not just this is a person that ticks a box but they still think exactly the same as me. So there's a bit of that. What else do we need to do? I think it's kind of letting go of some of our baggage, and really thinking about, again, I'm probably going to get myself in trouble with this, but the target seat list should not be the one that it was in 1997. Like, and there are places that, yes, we were successful before, and we've been close, but we are not at the moment. And there are a number of places that I know are very dear to Lib Dem hearts, but in the cold light of day, we are probably not going to win back for a long time. But there are other places where actually it does look really hopeful, and there are places that we could win that we've never held before. So we need to be better at looking at, right, where are we going to win in the future, and where can we build, rather than, oh, here's a seat that we held until 2000, let's go after it again.
I think you could summarise that as the debate between Yeovil and Wimbledon. Really,
Yeah.
it's places where, like, I mean, I'm probably being a little unfair on Yeovil, but there are places in the southwest where we were very successful in the past, where we haven't seen that success replicated. The fundamentals of why we were successful are no longer true. The fundamentals of what the seats are now are different. What people in the seats believe and what they feel and how they think about politics has changed. Whereas other places like Wimbledon, where historically we've never really done particularly well, was one of our very closest misses in this election, and was the seat that really that illustrates actually the potentially a formula for future success, where it has both some growing and new developing local record, as well as the demographics and the characteristics of the place fit with what our message and that has been moving to. There is still a sense at the moment, though, that the party is drifting a bit. Part of that is simply that with the pandemic, there's no political space for anybody other than basically the government and, to a limited extent, the leader of the opposition. We are so far down the list of anybody to talk to right now because there's so much else to talk about. That being said, polling has been grim. It is very tempting for people like you and me to say, well, we did campaign for Layla and Layla had ideas. That is obviously a tempting option. But aside from that, how do you think the party can go about developing a new message that will be relevant, for a future general election, and about thinking about strategy for longer term? And one thing I've been saying on quite a few of these episodes is the party does have a bit of time now, which is kind of weird. We've got general election isn't until 2024. For the last few years, we've been in a state of constant election. Whereas now we actually have some breathing room to think about longer term. So what do you think we should be doing in that space, or what do you think the direction of the discussion should be?
So I think one of the things that we need to decide is, where do we want to get to? And I know that sounds really strange because people will be sat there thinking, well, you're a political party, obviously you want to get into government. What I mean by that is, considering where we are in terms of the size of the parliamentary party, the polling, even in 2024, how many seats we could possibly win, we are not going to be in government on our own anytime soon. And so the kinds of conversations that I've had when I've been running strategy consultation sessions, and the things I talk to Mark and Jeremy, the other vice chair of the board, about are, if we want to get into government, do we have to do that with a PR system in place and get first past the post abolished? If the answer to that question is yes, then I think the next question is, well, what's the best way of achieving that goal? And I think you then get into quite an interesting debate about what we do. Brexit is not happening because UKIP and the Brexit Party won 300 odd MPs and ended up in government. They got that because they took votes from the Tories, and they made the Tories so scared of them that they called a referendum that Leave ended up winning. And I think there is something interesting in that for us. Is this a 30, 40 years, we might end up in government, we will then be able to abolish first past the post and be in government forever, which is still not going to happen. I'm not sure we're that good at fighting PR elections either, which is another thing we need to work out. Or is it finding that way to build that coalition so that PR becomes a reality, so that we can do better, and do better not for the sake of doing better, but because we said this during the leadership election with Layla, Imagine how much better the response to COVID would have been if there had been a much bigger, stronger group of Liberal Democrats in Parliament able to hold the government to account. I think, UBI would probably be a thing by now, and that's the kind of discussion that I think we need to have. The debate on should we target or not, and if we should target, where should we target, I think is a bit of a red herring for where we are. But as far as I'm concerned, we need PR and we need to work out how we get that.
So members watching this might be thinking, yes, I want to change the party to make it so that we are dedicated to campaigning for PR, or that we're much more inclusive, or that we this, that and the other. They might be thinking, I'm really disappointed Layla lost. If there's another leadership election in future, I want to be sure that Layla, or the candidate who reflects her political tradition, is successful. I am certainly in that group of people. I want to see that happen. What should we be doing looking ahead to help build those movements for change in the party? Well, how can we be more prepared for these? I mean, the party is a very civil place, it's very race, but we do have internal battles, we do have disagreements. How can we make sure that the side that is best placed to win those agreements is very loosely termed our side?
So I guess there's a few things within that. I mean, some of it is like picking your battles, really. So I think there has to be an acceptance that you're not going to take over the entire party overnight, but if you can get one person onto every single committee, that is a start. Because you are that, you've got information flows and that kind of thing. So I think that's a really good thing for people to be thinking about doing. And within that, when you get into those roles, there's a thing I've been reading recently about constructive dissent, which is my new favorite phrase. So the guy who invented the PlayStation at Sony had been told numerous times to stop doing what he was doing, but he carried on, and if he hadn't, Sony would be bankrupt in all likelihood. So I think it's like, when people from our side, as you say, get into those positions of power, it is about that constructive dissent. And so having a voice and speaking up, but doing it in a constructive way. I think one of the reasons that I get on with the majority of my colleagues on board is, I like to think anyway, that I am constructive in my opposition to some things that we might be doing. And I also don't necessarily always do it publicly. There are plenty of, side conversations that I'll have about things that I don't think are working. So I think that's one thing that people can do. I think my big thing there after Layla's election is, within the party, we need to challenge our view of what a leader is. Like, the number of times I heard, well, we tried a woman last time and it didn't work, because obviously we're all exactly the same. Or, well, I would vote for her, but I wish you wouldn't talk about her sexuality so much. Like, that narrative inside the party really needs to change. And for, that, not just for the people on our side, just for kind of everything within the party, we need to shift that dialogue. Because otherwise it is going to continue being the same people and the same types of ideas all the time. There's a few things there. I think it's also like finding each other, and that's obviously very difficult now, because you'd find like-minded people chatting away at the back of conference bar. We can't do that now, but finding ways to kind of connect people that think in the same way that people do, like this. Obviously Layla did it with the Build Back Better document, and I'd encourage people to just, write blogs, put stuff on Lib Dem Voice, like, just create the things and say the things that like people want to say if they're feeling that they're not being heard. Because I feel sometimes people are just kind of sat there going, well, this is the way the party is and it will never ever change. Actually, there are a few opportunities. You've just got to find them. So
I think organisation is a big part of it as well. In any political context, it's better to be organised than disorganised. Yeah, a lesson I learned, I was the youth rep on the Federal Policy Committee back at the end of the coalition when we were looking ahead to and that. And as I looked around the room, there were many people who had views that diverted from what the party was doing in government. There were many people who had a set of views about where we should be going in future on the manifesto, but actually they didn't necessarily get their ideas across. And the reason was, I felt that they were not very effective at working together and not very effective at coming up with a shared position and then advocating for that shared position together. And so there was always, crudely, a left-wing majority on that committee, and yet everything the committee supported and did was not in that direction. And it was because they were outmaneuvered. Because the leadership had a very, it may not look like it from the outside, but it did know what it wanted from those meetings, and it was able to get them because there wasn't a coherent alternative position being agreed and shared and discussed. I think it's very hard to get into those networks, whether it's in terms of getting elected to those committees in the first place and getting the profile that you need to be able to do that. But even when you're on those committees, when you're in those rooms, actually getting to know where different people stand and finding ways to get very busy people to take the time to talk to each other and work out how they can work together to achieve change is very difficult.
Yeah, it can be, and it's hard. And I think that's the other thing with things like this. It's, as well as being organised, you have to be resilient and you have to be patient. So you are, unfortunately, you're not going to walk into a committee meeting and, people don't have like symbols on their foreheads for which side of the fence they sit on. And obviously people like take a different view on different things. So, but you can just start by, finding those like-minded people. And I think as well, it's making connections, because like some of the people that I've met on these Lib Dem committees are some of the most talented and interesting people that I know. So there's also that as well. It's kind of, you don't necessarily need to always go into these things thinking it's going to be a battle. Like I understand, I was around in coalition as well. It did always feel like that. I don't think that's where we are now. So it's making connections with people on a personal level, and then, working out how you can work together. So as well as making the connections with the people that you agree with, it is also really important to have those relationships with the people you disagree with, so that you can have a simple conversation and work things through. If we're arguing amongst ourselves, we are not going to be able to take on anyone else. Like the energy I see expended on winning internal arguments is incredible and just a waste.
I think there's a challenge there in distinguishing between where are the places where you have to draw lines, where are the places where actually, in the grand scheme of things, that particular debate point, that particular issue isn't what matters. What matters is, getting the party to have an agenda that you can believe in and can campaign for and can use to try and change the country. But I think there is a point about, I think thinking about future leadership elections in particular, but also on some of the big policy debates in the party, ensuring that you have the networks of people built so that when these things come up, it's much easier to mobilise. It's much easier to get together and work to make change happen.
Yeah, exactly. It's a constant thing that you have to be doing, because you're right. If you're not kind of doing that all the time and building those relationships with people that you agree with, then when something hits the fan, you are completely unprepared. And that's also where, from a party reputation point of view, it can get very public and get very embarrassing quite quickly.
So in this period, I've been asking everyone I interview to think about the US election and what's been happening with that. and come up with one idea or one thought that you think we should take away from it and try to learn from as the Lib Dems in the UK.
I'm trying to think of something that I haven't heard Mark say already. I think one of the things actually is like, you have to be prepared to play the long game and to, you know, spot where you're likely to win. You know, the Democrats clearly had really good data and they followed the data. And that is what has given Biden the presidency. And I think I'm going to cheat and have another one. Is the other thing is like, we shouldn't assume that things will go our way just because we're really aggrieved by what's happened. And what I mean by that is, you know, Biden got the most votes of any presidential candidate in history. Well, the person who got the second highest is Trump. Like, he is still incredibly popular with a lot of people in the US. And, you know, we need to remember that, and need to remember that as awful as this government is managing the response to this pandemic, that does not mean that naturally everyone is going to flip to either Labour or to us. We still have a huge amount of work to do. And I think the Democrats actually realise that. They didn't, you know, they didn't watch Donald Trump get elected and then go, this is great, we can all go to bed for 4 years because we're bound to win next time. They actually went, my God, how have we lost to someone so inept? We need to get ourselves together. And I think it's that kind of stuff that we need to be better at. Like, I think in some ways, and this isn't just us, I think, you know, other parties, when they're up against the Tories, do this. We just kind of sit there and go, well, Boris is clearly a buffoon and they're all evil. Who on earth would vote for them? Well, it turns out a lot of people, and a lot of people vote for them on a consistent basis. So we need to keep that in mind.
I think it's important to always assume your opponents are geniuses.
Yeah.
Always assume that actually, deep down, they actually know what they're doing. Because one thing that's clear about Trump is, for all of his failings, he did understand certain things about politics and was able to make them work for him in ways that people hadn't imagined before. For all of Boris's failings in ways in which his government has been inept and failed, the Conservatives are still polling competitively. You know, they have not had a complete collapse in popularity. He has positioned himself carefully again and again to be in his best interest, you know, to be successful, to be in his best interests. He was able to win a very clear majority a year ago, despite a majority of people thinking the way the country was going was wrong, and the thinking that his approach was wrong. You know, he got his Brexit deal, which was a worse deal than Theresa May's, but he was able to make that into an election-winning argument. And yeah, if you always work on the assumption that your opponents actually have a plan and that they are executing that plan well, then you're more likely to be successful than if you underestimate them at any point.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things Trump does really well, that thankfully the Democrats managed to do this time, but I think one thing that we haven't been doing well, but that the Tories are brilliant at, is understanding the mood of the country and understanding, you know, what people's emotional reactions to things are going to be. We're not good enough at that, and I think we saw that in, you know, vote for us if we get a majority, we'll overturn the referendum result. Well, from that just sat with people badly, I think because of the people that we are in the party, we try and make the academic argument. Well, that's not how most people think. For a lot of people, they just sat there and went, oh, that feels a bit uncomfortable, I don't like it. Whereas the Tories, they understand people a lot better than we do. Now, that is not a natural thing. Like, they have clearly got all kinds of data, and they have lots of conversations to understand that. Because at the end of the day, you know, most of them are Eton Oxbridge people, so it's not like they have lived these experiences and are coming at it from that point of view. but they know what they need to look at and they know how to act on it. We're just not there, and that's one of the things that we need to work on over the next few years.
Thank you very much, Elaine. This has been really fun.
That's all right. Thank you for having me, and I hope people enjoy listening.
Thank you for listening to Build Back Liberal. Take care and stay safe.